Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna be featuring some of the changes that we're seeing in this latest big patch 0.9, namely the big balance changes. I'm gonna start by covering all the buffs in this one, and then in the next vid I'm gonna be covering all the nerfs and how they affect the builds and what kind of changes I'm making to my captain builds and so forth. Oh, and Twitch has decided with this latest patch that they're making the epic Twitch drop an exeter. So that means if you watch, for example, my stream and you link your Twitch account with your Wargaming account, the epic drop this time will be an exeter, which actually for a change is going to be a good premium. So that's a pretty nice buff. Speaking of the Twitch channel, thank you very much for all the follows. We're approaching 95k very quickly, which means 100k and the big giveaway is in the goal, or is in the target, so to say. First off, we have the Hindenburg. This thing got a buff. Another reload buff, which is honestly quite surprising because they buffed it from 10.5 seconds reload to a 9.8 second reload. And this is honestly pretty massive because this is honestly a bit of a double buff for the Hindenburg, because Gunther Lutyens was released quite recently, and maybe the cynic in me can't help but wonder that perhaps people weren't quite as eager to spend that 175k coal on Gunther Lutyens as they were on, or Günther Lutyens as they were on Kuznetsov, because the proc wasn't just that good, and honestly the Germans simply didn't really have any competitive ships. And by buffing the Hindenburg this much, well, they buffed the DPM of this ship past Zhao's level. The Hindenburg actually does more DPM, it does 184 or 209k with the reload mod, whereas the Zhao's 203. So it has outpaced the Zhao in raw DPM, whereas the fire starting capacity is basically the same. The difference is, however, of course, that if you run, for example, IFHE on the Hindenburg, which you can pen the likes of the ships that I'm shooting here. You can pen the Kremlin deck armor, you can pen the Sovietsky Soyuz, the Yamato, the Musashi, the Izumo, all of these that have 57 or 60 millimeters. You can pen it with IFHE. And when you mix in something like Gunther Lutyens into this mix, he has this iron strike capacity. There you have it, perfect timing. It gives you 7.5% faster reload. And this means that you can get the Hindenburg reload down to, what are we looking at here? We're looking at a bit more than 7 seconds. And then you add in AR and it actually dips below 7-second reload. And this combined with Hindenburg's honestly very impressive DPM has turned the ship into quite a DPM monster now, especially if you get the farm AP like here. Hindenburg is very powerful. This is a bit of an unexpected buff. Welcome in a way, but I have to wonder, have they maybe gone a bit too far? I feel like they're really going out of their way to try to make Hindenburg viable again. There's been significant Henry IV nerfs, which I'll get into in the next vid, but more importantly, this DPM buff is absolutely significant and something you will notice when playing the ship. Build-wise, I haven't actually changed too much on my Hindenburg build. I'm still running the basic, that is of course Hydro and Spotter Plane. You run Hydro because defensive AA has been nerfed, or AA in general has been nerfed so hard that it's not worth running. And you run Spotter Plane because we're running the reload module, so we want the extra range. So here you run the increased spotting aircraft duration, increased hydro duration, the AA module, mostly because the dispersion gives cruisers such a small benefit, faster rudder shift, concealment, and finally a faster reload. The idea is that you compensate for your lack of range by having a lot of spotter plane uptime. As I've covered in previous Hindenburg games or commentaries, this has not changed. However, the build has gotten some slight modifications to it. We'll still start with the usual priority target, Adrenaline Rush, but I don't really go Superintendent anymore because I've struggled, especially, maybe it's just patch day games or maybe it's just the player base kind of becoming but I struggle to actually make use of all my heals before the game ends. Most of the time the benefit just isn't there. So instead I build Demo Expert, Concealment Expert, and yes, I actually build IFHE on the Hindenburg now. as I mentioned, there are 5 battleships against which this thing is insanely powerful. Kremlin and Sovietsky Soyuz, they are so used to just being able to go nose in tank and ignore you, and then suddenly you're basically smacking them for 5 to 6k per volley, and especially with Gunter Lutyens and this incredible DPM output that you have, you melt them surprisingly quickly, and the numbers you can pump out are pretty obscene. So I actually quite like IFHE on Hindenburg these days. And expert loader, you switch APH a lot. Faster turret reverse, mostly because if you have Gunter Lutyens, you want that improved turret reverse, which means that you can get it down to a pretty impressive 22.6, and jack of all trades. You can see, of course, the buffed reload here, 8.6 with this build, and then with Gunter and AR, you can cut it down significantly. So, significant Hindenburg buffs, and a slight adjustment to this build. The second ship to receive some much needed buffs is the Montana, one of the original tier 10 battleships. The Montana gets its heal buffed from 0.5% per second to 0.66% per second. Now, it might not sound like much, but you have to remember that the Montana heal ticks for 28 seconds, which means adding all of this to the duration means that you get significantly more healing from it. This is actually the same heal that all the other US battleships have had, non-premiums that is, and it does help alleviate the survivability issues of the Montana somewhat. Is it quite enough to make up for something like the Ohio, which I consider honestly blatant power creep compared to the Montana? Well, no, not really. You don't have a fast acting heal yet, or a fast reloading heal. You have no amazing secondaries, you can't do much 30mm of plating, but it is a step in the right direction, and I think it's something that the Montana quite needed. And I do have to say that the change has been significant. And it's significant enough that I notice it in daily play. I've only played it for 1 day, but already now I've noticed I've been able to survive situations that I would not otherwise be able to survive. Honestly, the easiest way of seeing just how significant the buff is just looking at my health bar and seeing that huge gray section that I can now heal to recover. So Montana's, as long as you don't get bursted down, it's still not able to cycle heals as quickly as something like an Ohio, but if you're able to disengage and survive long enough, the amount of healing that you can actually do in the Montana is large. And this, I think, is a buff that is in the right direction and very much needed. This heal has, however, not prompted me to change my build in any way. We're still building for secondary survival because we don't lose turrets, tankiness, AA because we can't build for gun dispersion, you can't do it on US battleships, additional resistance against fires and floodings, you can go rudder shift if you choose, concealment, and finally improved dispersion. Oh, wrong ship, but same concept. That was actually the Ohio I was showing, but I run identical captain builds and setups for obvious reasons. On the Montana, if you have Halsey, it's obviously worth running because you get benefits from the expert loader, expert marksman, as well as the Confederate hit hard talent, which increases your reload. But the build is very much the bog standard. You start with priority target, you build adrenaline rush, superintendent, fire prevention, concealment expert, expert loader, and expert marksman, followed finally with jack of all trade for the last 2 points. Nothing has changed in terms of Montana build. The ship is just a tad bit more survivable, provided you can cycle enough of these heals. Obviously, running the healing flag is highly recommended. Well, it's highly recommended on any battleship, but now more than ever, it's worth taking the benefits of this buff. The final ship to have received some buffs is the Błyskawica, the Polish tier 7 destroyer that has been around, well, basically for ages. They've changed some of the aiming angles on the main guns. They have extended the first turret by 10 degrees, the horizontal aiming angle, and the second turret by 1 degree, and the fourth turret by 15 degrees. So the idea is to make it easier to bring all your guns to bear on the target. They've also changed the traverse angles of her torpedo tubes. They have extended them 8 degrees to the bow and 2 degrees to the stern to make it basically easier, snappier to get those torpedoes off at different angles. Personally, well, I mean, once again, it's nice that they're buffing this old ship, very much needed. This thing has been a big victim to power creep, and honestly, the ship hasn't been the same ever since they got rid of stealth fire. Ultimately though, I don't think this is quite enough, because I think ideally this ship needs maybe, if not a concealment buff, then they should give it a slight DPM buff. Because right now it either gets matched or beaten in damage by most of its counterparts. If not, they have better concealment or better torpedoes, or just in general they're just better. The Blyska isn't really much of a competitive pick anymore, and it hasn't been one for a long time. Honestly, I have a hard time remembering the last time I saw Blyska being played actively. Maybe back when it was tier 7 ranked, solo ranked, tier 7, then people used to play it a fair bit. But even that fell off quite fast afterwards. So yeah, the ship can absolutely use some help, but overall the buffs that I've seen being given out this patch have been pretty good, because they have targeted 3 ships that all have kind of fallen off the meta a fair bit and could absolutely use some buffs. I can show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, starting off, module wise, pretty straightforward. Smoke, speed boost, damage con, not much else to it. Turret survival, if you can afford to spare an improved speed boost, do it. If not, engine survival. Better dispersion on the guns and faster torpedo turret traverse, because you don't really have any AA on this ship at all. Another significant weakness, especially since your air concealment, well, 2.8, it's not the end of the world. Could be better, but it's not the end of the world. And finally acceleration, which can be a bit iffy because your rudder shift is honestly quite poor for a destroyer, but I feel like it's necessary because you want to sit in smokes quite a bit and farm from them, because you can't open water gunboat the way you used in the past. Blyska is not super fast and super hard to hit as it used to be, and there are things like rocket planes which will force you to take cover in smokes a fair bit, so I just find propulsion mod to be much easier to utilize. Captain build wise, you start off priority, you build last stand, survivability expert and concealment expert. We start off with the standard DD build. After that you can build 10% faster reload, fire chance, or maybe build AR before fire chance, since you do shoot a fair of AP. In which order these 3 skills are taken is kind of up to you. I don't think there's a direct right or wrong. I think BFT should be first, because it's just a flat out 10% DPM buff for your guns. But after that, which one you take of these 2 is entirely up to you. And finally, I run preventive maintenance instead of expert loader, because the reload is 5.4 with AR even less, so you will not find yourself needing expert loader that often. Those were the 3 ships that got any buffs, and honestly I'm quite positive towards most of these buffs. I think they're generally quite good changes. The Hindenburg buff might be a bit over the top, we'll see how it turns out, but the combination, the synergy with Günther Lutyens and the buff is a bit much. The Montana buff, no chance of that being overpowered. Blyska, no chance of that being overpowered. These are just good changes. The nerfs on the other hand, well, I have a fair bit to talk about on those nerfs. I really don't like the way they've nerfed some of these ships or changed them, but I will get into that in the next vid. As always, thank you guys for watching, thank you for following, thank you for subscribing. If you can take the time, drop a follow on my Twitch, or just show up and watch the stream, since you can get an Exeter just for watching it these days, which is actually pretty awesome. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in.